Are you working on community or culture in your organization? And which one is more important? I'm Zoë Routh, and welcome to The Future of Leadership. On Planet Human this week, do me a favor and put in humanoid robots when you go to YouTube. So go to YouTube, put in the hashtag humanoid robots, and then get lost going down the rabbit warren of watching these very cool videos of these very lifelike robots. This is the future, and I wrote about it in my Guy Enterprises series. I call these humanoid robots doppelbots. They are humanoid-looking robots with artificial intelligence blended in. So if you want to know what the future looks like, it includes humanoid robots. So go down that path. It's really cool. On Planet Zoe this week, I'm actually in Brisbane. I'm working on a program with the Peter Cullen Trust as a facilitator with Outback Initiatives, who I've done plenty of work with over the last 15 odd years or so. And we are looking at how we bring together people to think about big picture, long-term impact of environment and economic and political systems on water, or water on the effect of those particular systems. While that's all happening, my fourth novel, Olympus Rising, is back with the editor. I've done the round 2 edits, so we are getting into the nitty-gritty flow of that. So that's very exciting. We're getting into finishing lane, production lane of that novel. So it should be out in a few months. So I won't put any deadline on that in particular. Power Games, my nonfiction book, has moved from mulling into writing. So I'm now on track to produce that book. It should go to the editor by the end of November. So that's all pretty exciting. My writing projects are on track. What else? And I also have a live in-person event coming up in Canberra on November 8th called the Leadership Conclave. We're going to spend an immersive day looking at the big picture, strategic aspects of 2025 so you can hit the ground running with some big ideas to wrestle with and incorporate into your strategy. Join us there. The link will be in the show notes. So my what if question this week is, what if the disjointed workplace continues into the future? What do I mean by disjointed? I mean remote working, hybrid working. What if it continues to plow into the future, which I completely anticipate that does? What does this mean for balancing this need for autonomy, which is what working from home or working remotely is all about, that sort of independence and freedom to choose how and where we work, with this need for connection? How do we balance those two? Because they seem at odds with one another. It's really about how we create a sense of community. And my guest today, who I'll introduce in a moment, is all about that. If you think about your neighborhood, what do you have in common with these people? Probably not a lot. You come from different backgrounds, you have different professions, and yet you share something important. You probably share the desire to live peacefully next to one another, to have a nice home environment, and to feel safe and secure. With those common elements, you can start to build connections and a sense of belongingness in community. And I think this is essential when we think about workplaces, because what do we actually have in common with the people we have at work, apart from this idea that we're working towards some organizational goal? Apart from that, there's a lot of differences. So why do we try and make homogeneous? Why do we try and make people like each other? Not like each other, like enjoy each other, but I mean, be like each other. And I think that's a really important distinction. So how do we create that sense of belonging, that shared platform together? So let's get into it. I would love to introduce my next guest. Her name is Lauren Buckley, and she is founder of the Hush Collective. She is a former, trying to read my notes, copywriter, so into communications, and political advisor. And now she is consultant for big picture thinker organizations and leaders who start with this idea of building community. Without further ado, here is Lauren. All the way from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Welcome to the show, Lauren Buckley.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here.
And it is very thrilling to hear your insights on the culture versus community conversation that we've got coming up.
Yeah.
So people don't often, spring from the womb and enter into this kind of work. So how did you
No.
end up positioned as somebody who wanted to reform the feminine economy and create this collective community culture idea?
Yeah. So I always thought my dream was to be Clarice Starling from Silence of the Lambs. So I thought I was going to be an FBI profiler when I
Ew.
graduated from college. Because I was a sociology major. I'm obsessed with how people operate, how we organize ourselves, how we get along, how we fight, how we build things together, how we tear them down. Um, but that was not in the cards for me from a professional perspective for lots of reasons I will not get into on this podcast. And so I ended up double majoring in strategic mass communications as a way to continue to be close to the idea of people and how do we communicate and how do we organize and how do we again build and break things together. And obviously strategic mass communications is a major part of how we do that. And so I ended up in the creative side of the agency world, eventually shifting into more of a strategic role. And in my purview, based on my background, based on some of the other areas that I've gotten myself involved in over the course of time, advocacy, DE&I work, political work, I ended up in brand strategy at a advertising agency. And then since then, I've worked in every type of strategic mass communications there is, whether it's PR, internal comms, political comms. And ultimately, what I learned in every single one of those scenarios is that strategy is a key part of working, but strategy also doesn't work up to 90% of the time. And that's because we miss the people part. We People are messy. We don't like to change. And the reality, and I'm sure you know this better than anyone, talking to the future leaders of the world, businesses require growth. Growth requires change. Businesses are made up of people, and people don't like change. So when we think about a strategic plan, and then we think about the people who need to carry that strategic plan forward, more often than not, there are massive breakdowns between what we need to and want to and say we hope to accomplish, and then the actual support relationships and what we call workflow design that people actually need to be able to make those things happen. And so all of my experience has led me to building a business that is really trying to close that gap and create ways of working that help us achieve goals, including growth, um, but do it in a way that really focuses more on what we believe to be the most valuable resource any business has. And this is, I'm saying this in the face of technology, AI, and everything. It's the people, it's the human capital that you have inside of your business that most leaders are sorely lacking the either ability, time, resources, or skills to activate as a community in a way that allows us to achieve our business goals and not have everyone continue to be operating at a deficit. Again, I'm sure you are very aware of the anxiety, depression, burnout, turnover, all of the data that suggests that work is getting harder and harder for every one of us. And leadership is required to grow more and more year over year. And those two things are not creating the results that the leaders, the businesses, or the people within them actually want.
So enter your solution, and that to
Yes.
help people contend with the changes required for business growth and contribution is the idea of creating community. And
Yes.
what caught my eye as the pitch came across my desk, uh, what is no one is talking about building community in organizations. Everybody's talking about building culture. So for you, what is the distinction between the two, and how are they different?
Yeah. So I always like to start with organizational culture is a 1980s idea. It gained popularity in the 1980s and really became an application more in the 1990s. So just to think about that, we're in 20, it's about to be 2025, and organizational culture has not evolved in the way that every other aspect of businesses have had to evolve. Um, so for us, I mean, the reason that the 70% of change initiatives fail and 90% of strategic initiatives fail is because culture is still separated from actually the way that we do our jobs day to day in multiple ways. One being it's an HR issue, and yet HR leaders, future HR leaders, are not in a position to actually change the operations of a business. But number two, culture requests assimilation. It requests us to try and fit in. And I am going to age myself. I'm 41. I am an older millennial. And I'm pretty sure that my generation, even, and I may be overstating, is the last generation who cares about fitting in, especially at work. So number one, like thinking about asking a bunch of people to, number one, bring their whole selves to work, but also fit in is incredibly contradictory. What community requests is relationship, building relationships that allow people to do exactly what your, area of expertise is collaborate. Um, when we think about the work that's being done in any business on any given day, it's a it's a millions of group projects. Group projects are happening everywhere. And what we all know from the experience of working on group projects, whether that's in academics or something else, is it's terrible because there aren't clear ways of actually relating to one another, dealing with the conflict that comes up when you have group projects, and holding people accountable to what actually needs to happen when things go wrong. And so when we talk about culture, it's huge. Culture is big C. It's as big as capitalism, I would say. And when we talk about what businesses require these days, especially when it comes to constantly evolving, culture doesn't constantly evolve. Culture moves at a very, very slow pace. What we know is from a community organizing perspective, and you can look at all types of organizing that happens outside of the corporate sector. Community is what actually enables people to coalesce around a shared vision, shared goals, shared understanding of what we are trying to accomplish. Community allows people in their 70s and people in their 20s to connect, to work together, to understand what each of them are bringing to the table from a power position. Community really is what drives change. Culture affects change, but community is what drives it forward. And ultimately, community is all about where I started, which is relationship. And that is not something that most corporations or companies even talk about. And we can get into the barriers, but the main reason is time. We don't believe that we have the time to build community. So we default to culture, but culture isn't working, and it hasn't worked. I mean, it worked at the time when it became an idea. The leaders that really thought about how we coalesce, how we communicate, how we collaborate, how we connect as a group of people in this business is important, and it has an ability to give us a leg up, whether it's acquiring and retaining talent, making people feel better at work. But ultimately now what we're seeing is culture is continuing to drive separation, drive anxiety, drive burnout. And we believe that the ability to build and organize community, especially using community organizing, proven community organizing principles, is the solution. And a big one for us is your employee experience directly impacts your customer experience. Your employee experience, therefore, directly impacts your bottom line. If we are all supposed to be more data-driven leaders, especially the future leaders, I want to know why that data is not being sorted, accepted, and applied in the same way as the data that we have around, I don't know, things like performance metrics for marketing or turnover for HR, because ultimately those things drive business.
I want to pick up on something that you've seeded in there that's kind of nibbling away at my brain. So
Yeah.
you talk about culture requiring people to fit in and conform conform. You actually
Yeah,
didn't use the word conform, but that's sort of
I
what I'm
didn't. Yeah.
translating,
Yep.
fitting in. And community is about relationships. So this idea of belonging sits across both of those, but has a different nature to it. If I'm
Hmm.
picking up what you're putting down. So does
Absolutely.
belonging in culture means compliance and conforming? Does belonging in community mean I have connected relationships? And
I have,
go
oh,
ahead.
yeah, go ahead. No, please finish your question.
No, I think that was my question.
Oh, okay.
How does belonging
Um,
fit in community?
yeah, I think the way that we have experienced it and the way that we would define it is the belonging in community is that you are actually not just, you don't fit in because of the things that you do. You have belonging because of who you are, what you bring to the table. You are respected for you yourself as a resource. So often, I mean, how often do human beings talk about themselves as a resource? Very rarely. But companies talk about us like we're resources all the time. But the
Yeah, it drives me
reality is,
nuts.
if yeah, it doesn't. It's the same thing as healthcare. It's like I'm not a patient anywhere else. Can you just treat me like a person? And I think it's the same thing in business. In fact, we hear all the time leaders saying things like, we want you to bring your full self to work. We want you to give us your all. We want you to be entrepreneurial. We want you to be take control of your own destiny here. That only happens if I have the psychological safety and the actual support to bring my full self to work, to be a resource for other people, to feel like I can show up in a room. My opinion is going to be not only heard, but actually weighed. And so, from a belonging perspective, community doesn't ask me to change anything about myself to belong. Community basically gives me the rules of engagement, the decision making protocols, the understanding of our history, the understanding of where we're going, so that me as an individual, I am someone who can belong because of what I bring to the table, not because I am the easiest, I think, and most often um, example of this is most people, when change is something that a company wants to do, most people actually don't speak up because they are afraid if they reinforce the idea that things need to change, they are at risk of losing their jobs. That's the difference between belonging in a culture setting versus belonging in a community setting. If the community has agreed that change needs to happen, then nobody should feel afraid that they're going to lose their job because they have an idea of what that change needs to look like.
Big call. I'm just thinking about the
I mean,
practicalities of that. That's interesting to see if that can actually come about.
I think the biggest thing is power. When we talk about especially corporate culture, if we talk about, I mean, even that, there's corporate culture and then there's cultures within corporate culture. But when we talk about corporate culture, the way that capitalism has set it up is that power is belongs at with a small group of people at the very top. It is an extractive way of thinking about who has the ability and who has the talent and who has the creativity to solve problems, who has the ability to make the decisions as to what is going to happen next. So I think a big shift, and it is a big call that I just said, is there are plenty of leaders right now that believe that power building and power sharing are possible within corporate settings. Um, and that is a major difference in the way that corporate culture currently operates and where we see corporate culture having an opportunity to actually make it better for everyone. The in community organizing, the thought is people that are closest to the problems most likely have the solution. The way that we are currently set up culturally is the people that are closest to the problem are never even asked to join the conversations around solving the big problems. And that's a major shift in how we help our clients think about coming up with solutions, specifically for strategic planning and workflow design. You have to understand what the people who are closest to the problem are seeing and how they would use their own imagination, their own creativity, and their own resources to solve it. Now, does that mean that that's automatically going to be the answer? No, but what it does mean is more and more businesses would be coming up with better and better solutions, not just for their clients, but for their employees, because those things would at least get air in the room. They would be considered, they would be talked about, and they would be discussed. So power sharing is a big one that we talk about a lot in as far as shifting from culture to community.
I think that is very exciting, and it loops into the idea of community building requires collaboration, and collaboration Absolutely. Requires a new expression or not execution, exercising of power, which you alluded to just then. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about why collaboration is hard and how we go about power building and power sharing as part of curing the challenge of collaboration.
Yeah. Well, I think first and foremost, and I would love to know your opinion on this, but I think collaboration is a skill. And unfortunately, what we assume more often than not is if you're an adult, you just inherently have that skill. We don't. The majority of us do not. It is not something that comes naturally to everyone. And also, again, when we talk about corporate culture, or we talk about capitalism, or we talk about the systems that have major impact on us, rugged individualism is the key to success, or at least that's the storyline. Well, if I'm supposed to achieve everything myself, if I'm supposed to be an individual that can do it all, then I'm also, honestly, probably a little bit anti-collaboration, because if I don't get all the credit, then I'm not going to get what I deserve. And that goes back to the power sharing and other dynamics. But I think if collaboration is a skill and you agree to that, the problem is we don't work on developing that skill at all in companies and corporations. There is no place, again, mostly it's like a time or development situation, but most places don't believe that that is part of what doing better work looks like. But that is literally the key to doing better work, is helping a group of people who have most likely never worked together before figure out how to work together in a way that allows them to be collaborative. I think we're in a time where soft skills are becoming the hard skills, and collaboration is one of them. And that is something that we are going to continue to have to wrestle with, is this idea that the assumption of belief, or the assumption or belief that we all just know how to do that and know how to do it well. I mean, that goes for communication, that goes for connection, all the things that actually are required to get a group project done well are soft skills, and not things that corporate America has really focused on, or even the leadership training it has focused on. I don't know if you've heard of a recent book that came out called Leadership BS, but it's all about how, it's all about how we've basically trained leaders to be terrible at it, at what leaders actually need to do, and that it's all connected. All of it's connected.
I think at the source of the problem, you named it there, Lauren, that it's a cultural as in the bigger national idea of culture. Rugged individualism is definitely an American ethos, and I think it's also shows up in other Western cultures as well, Canadian, Australian. This rugged individual, the idea of the hero can overcome all, we can be our self-made human, all that kind of ethos and story and myth is central to our identity in our larger national heritage. And I think you're right, it puts a stake in the heart of collaboration, or that we need to remove a little bit. Not that we need to pizzle all over rugged individualism, but it's a tension that we need to manage. This idea that we can have individual achievement and collective success is one of the tensions that leaders need to navigate more deftly if they are to achieve effective collaboration. And no one is actually, very few people are surfacing this as an issue. They just sit around the table getting irritated with each other as they try and steal credit for things and blame each other for failures, instead of just actually saying, well, this is our rugged individualism clashing with our collective success. let's get that on the table and then get on with it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's said another way, and I mean, what you said is exactly accurate. It's ego. There's a lot of ego, and ego's it's helpful. It's a helpful thing. We all have
Mm,
it. We all have different relationships to it, but I think there's really the cognitive dissonance that can happen in a corporate boardroom is quite astonishing, considering the fact that not no one in that room got to where they are by themselves. Nobody, nobody
that's right.
did. And the work that the people that they are currently leading are required to figure out how to do it together. It's amazing that we are still living at a time where it doesn't feel like that is a responsibility then of either leadership to model or organizationally, like operationally, which is how my business talks about it. We're an operational partner, how to make that part of the system that we have to work within. Because right now it's just a matter of it doesn't exist. What does it look
Mm,
like to build it and make it part of the system so that it isn't necessarily just one person's responsibility or job or a department like HR? What does it look like when everyone feels like they have a stake in that part of the system? Because that is the part that actually enables them to achieve collective impact.
yeah, I love it. That's huge, big work, transformative work. Lauren,
It,
are you
it really
ready?
is.
It totally
Yes.
is. It totally is. And I feel a little
Yeah.
bit glib now launching into the next segment. Are you ready for the fast
Oh,
three?
oh, I am. I prepped for this part because I was like, I know I'm going to have to go fast. So,
Okay.
yes,
Whenever I
let's
say
do
the
it.
fast three, it ends up being a conversation. So we'll see how we go. Number
Oh,
one,
okay.
what is the future technology you most want right now?
I mean, this is totally selfish, even though it is related, which is teleportation or
Do you know
or
that's
the transporter from Star Trek. Like, I want to be able to. I think it's great that we live at a time when we have this, like, but I would love to be able to push a button and be standing next to you talking in the same microphone, Zoe. And I think we
yeah.
would honestly be a better world for it.
Yeah, I agree. And just FYI, that is the that is the most answered technology question. It'd be surprising how many people want teleportation. I'm constantly astonished by that.
Well, I can be more,
Okay.
I could give you a more business answer if you would like.
No, that's perfect.
Okay,
All
okay,
right. Number
okay,
two,
great.
best tip you ever got for leadership.
Leadership is a privilege. It isn't
It
about
so
you.
is. Mm,
And I think the way that the person made me really understand that is the success of my leadership should be measured by the experience and growth of the people you lead. It's very similar to DE and I work. Like, I cannot call myself an ally, but someone else, if someone else does, then it means that I have gotten there. I've done the work to really show up that way. And leadership is exactly the same.
love it. All right. Number three, what are you reading or
Yeah.
listening to right now?
So I'm always reading Emergent Strategy. I've gone back to that book a million times over. It's one of my favorites, and it seems applicable to just so many things in life. I'm reading Beloved Economies. I'm really getting interested in sort of next economy work, and obviously that's related to the business. Um, and then from a podcast perspective, I am loving, there's a new one called it's not new, but it's new to me, called Normal Gossip. And it's just something I can kind of turn on in the background and listen to. And it, again, is my sociology brain just loves listening to sort of everyday stories about people. Like This American Life is a favorite as well. But a new one that I just started getting into because it was recommended by a mentor is Practical Radicals, which talks a lot about sort of antithetical movements or movements and work that's being done that's antithetical to status quo.
That's so cool. Okay. Thank you so much. Those are some great recommendations. I love it. Be Googling those later.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay. Thank you, Lauren. That was the
of
fast
course.
three. One question I haven't asked you yet is
Yeah,
about the Hush Collaborative. Can you tell, is that the
yeah,
right term? Is it Hush Collective or Hush
it is.
Collaborative?
Collaborative.
Collaborative. Oh,
Collaborative, yeah, yeah. And the reason that we chose that word is because, again, very feminine economy and very similar to other things that I've talked about today. Um, when it comes to consulting, strategic work, third party coming into a business, so much of it is black box. So much of it is, okay, tell us your problem. We're going to go fix it without you and then come back. The reality is, our partners and our clients are collaborators. We need them to be able to do our jobs well. As much as they are hiring us to come in and be a third party, we treat their expertise as expertise. And that's very important to us. And so collaborative in the name was meant to signal our work is going to be collaborative. We are not the right partner for you if you want someone to just go away and try and fix the problem and come back. We are trying to solve the 90 and 70% failure rate, which means we have to be in it, and they and our partners have to be in it as well. But that's also true for partners that we bring into for projects. We view those people as collaborators. When you're bringing in someone for strategic partnership, you have to treat them like they are as an equal member at the table. And so for us, it was really important to signal that, as even the title of our company, how we work, how we treat you, and how we want people to experience working with us.
it's beautiful. Thank you.
Thanks.
Lauren,
Yeah.
where can people find out more about you and the Hush Collaborative and the work that you do?
Yeah, so the website is thehushcollaborative.com. So you can actually go there, and we have everything from our points of view and blog posts and LinkedIn and information there. You can see some case studies and also just a little bit more about our business. My business partners are Allie Fendrick and Kate Meehan, and all three of us have our own sort of areas of thought leadership. And so you can find any one of us on LinkedIn. Our Instagram is called Honest for Good. It is not the name of our company. It's actually one of our values, because, again, going back to collaboration, none of it works if you are starting from a place of opaqueness or a place of not being honest. And we believe that even the tough conversations are for good. And so you can find us on Instagram at Honest for Good. And then you'll see us popping up more in places like this. And so we, again, really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and be a part of this bigger conversation of what does the future of work look like? What does collaboration look like in the future? And how can we make work feel better for everybody? Like, growth doesn't feel good unless there's a plan. And we help people get through that temporary discomfort of the growth part when you don't have a plan.
I love it. Thank you so much, Lauren. This has been extraordinary. Viva la evolution.
Yes, yes. We're both doing the good work.
That's right. Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
so much.
This has been great.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Oh, you speak so beautifully. It was just a joy to listen to you.
Oh,
Well, I hope you found that as inspiring and uplifting as I did. I really enjoyed that interview. And now on to Read to Lead. And the book I thought complemented Lauren Buckley's philosophy, if you like, is one of my most favorite leadership books on culture, and that is Culture Eats Strategy for Lunch. It's by Kurt Kaufman and Kathy Sorensen. It is one of the only books I've highlighted pretty much almost every sentence throughout that book. For me, it has been very seminal in my thinking about culture in organizations. Separate to community, but it builds on the concept. One of the ideas I like to think about when it comes to culture in organizations is the idea of culture like the human body. The culture is made up of individual cells, from pinky fingers to elbows to stomach cells, and they're all quite different, and yet they perform similar functions. And these cells unite to create a particular function in the ecosystem of the body. So what does a pinky finger have to do with a stomach cell? Very disparate, very different indeed. And yet when we work collectively in an interconnected system, that is the human body, we can produce amazing results. And the metaphor applies to an organization. And it also applies to this idea of culture. We don't want to create a culture that is monotone. Otherwise, you'd have a bunch of pinky fingers running around, as opposed to this unique, diverse set of cells and tissues and muscles and organs that create the wonderful symphony. Oh my God, now we're blending metaphors of the human body. Hopefully you made the jump of logic with me on that one. Anyway, that's the book I totally recommend this week. Culture Eats Strategy for Lunch by Kurt Kaufman and Kathy Sorensen. Well, that's the show for this week. If you are an insider of the podcast, and you can become an insider by signing up at zoerouth.com, click on podcasts, and you can sign up there, and you will get all the important extras that come with this episode, which include the implementation sheet, discussion questions, and interesting factoids for looking smarty pants in front of others at the water cooler. So that's all waiting for you at zoerouth.com. Click on podcast. In the meantime, I would love if you looked after yourself and that you lived with grace. Live with grace. I don't know what grace is. Let's start over again. If you live with grace, lead in service. Live well, lead well.